Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I am delighted to have my friend Aiden back. And we are relaunching this series, the second series on Jung. In the first series, we looked at the core concepts of Jung, and then we had several Jungian experts come and talk about their own work. What we're trying to do here in the second series is slightly different. We're going to invite people who have been profoundly influenced by Jung. Typically, Jung is a part of their work, is a core part of what they do. And we're going to ask them a very simple question. What has been their journey with Jung? And what have been the milestones or wonders that they have seen along the way that have transformed them? And I'm going to start with my friend Aiden, and I'm hoping that he will help me, do some of these interviews in the future. So he's the best person that I could think of to start with. All right. So Aiden, welcome.
Thanks, Shrikant. And I'm honored to be someone that you think of with Jungian stuff. So I'm glad to be here and for everybody else to be present and interested in the topic. So it's exciting for me.
Wonderful. So Aiden, when did you encounter Jung first? And how did it start? So please share.
Well, there's the sort of the pivotal moment of when I encountered Jung, and then there's the first moment where I encountered Jung. So when I was growing up in my household in Los Angeles, Jung was not a part of the conversation. It wasn't a topic in my household, nor was really religious conversation a big topic of interest in my household. I love what you said earlier in the introduction about the relevance of spirituality in Jung's perspective. I will say, as I've studied it more and more, now it's been 13 years, I've been steeped in Jungian psychology. And that's been an idea that I've landed on as well, that his contributions in terms of marrying spirituality and psychology, or spirituality and psychotherapy, is really important. And so I say all of that because when in the household I grew up in, it wasn't like Jung was a part of the conversation, and it wasn't like spirituality was a part of the conversation. But I did have a copy of Man and His Symbols, and I can still picture it in my head because I tried reading it and I did not know what the heck he was talking about. I mean, at that time, I was an adolescent and the terms didn't make sense to me. The topic didn't make sense to me. It wasn't a phase of life where being initiated into Jungian psychology made sense, but I can still picture the book. I mean, it was taped together in the top and the spine was falling apart, and I can see it in my mind's eye. So that's when I first experienced it. It was a book in my house. I don't even remember how we got it, if I bought it or my parents bought it. But I did try to read it, and it did wind up in my books, and it was far too soon. Then, when I really sort of probably the more appropriate answer when I first got exposed to Jung was in my late 20s, when I was 28, and I was working in New York as a musician and basically decided to go into therapy. I just sort of had a thought. I thought, okay, now would be a good time to do that, you know. And I had the income or the situation where I was able to do it. I thought, okay, I'll take this chance to work on myself a little bit. And something inside of me, I'm sure some of you here have had this experience where it's like you hear some kind of an inner guidance or a sense of being pointed a certain direction or being guided a certain direction. And when I had the thought, you know, I should go back into therapy, or it would be a good time to do that, I just felt this pull. It was like, you should go into Jungian analysis. Just like a quiet inner knowing. I don't know how to put it. And it was very strange because it wasn't on my conscious radar. It wasn't like I was thinking about Jung or seeking out Jung, but whatever that voice was, or that guidance was, I listened to it. And then that's how it happened. I found my first Jungian analyst in New York and started seeking out readings and groups. And it quickly snowballed, but it kind of started with that inner voice just being like, this is a direction for you. And it's turned out to be very accurate. I mean, that's really a trajectory that's affected my life greatly. So I don't know
Wow.
why that happened, but it did happen.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. So let's go on. What did you do next?
Um, well, I didn't know much about it at the time, so I didn't have like a map, right, or a rule book. It was just sort of like, okay, well, I'm interested in this. I think I just Google searched Jungian analysts in New York City, found somebody that looked compelling or described themselves in a compelling way, and I went into an analysis. And the interesting thing that happened right away was that my dream life shifted dramatically. It was like immediately. I mean, I had a dream that I remember, that I still remember, the night before going into that analysis. And then many, many dreams. It was almost like a gate had opened, you know, like some sort of doorway had opened, and um, a lot of dream material came through, a lot of dream material. And it actually turned out that that analyst was not the right fit, or vice versa, however you put that. But the goodness of fit wasn't there. But there was a sense of my psyche is responding to this Jungian approach, and my dream life is responding. So basically, I started uh, looking for classes that I could take in New York City. And, you know, there's the Jung Foundation where they train analysts. And in one of the places they train analysts at the New York Institute, they have a continuing education uh, branch of the organization called the Jung Foundation. So I would take classes there and joined a meetup group by Jorge, by
Mm.
George, who you met,
Yes,
and
yes.
got very active in that. We actually read the Tao Te Ching like
Oh,
in
wow.
2012 or something at that time.
Well, I have to tell you that that was my first introduction
Hmm.
to Jung as well. You know, George or
Oh
Jorge's
yeah,
group. Yes, I
that's
remember
cool.
sitting in Bryant Park,
Yeah,
and I'd been watching that group for a long time, but he had a very strict requirement that you had to have done the required reading, and
yeah.
typically it it was about 200 to 300 pages of reading, and it's not something that I was. But then he chose this book, Seven Sermons
Hmm.
to the Dead, and it was a short book, and I read that, and that was the first thing I read, and still my absolute favorite
Wow,
writing by Jung. But I am indebted to George for introducing me to Jung as well. Please go on.
that's cool. I love that crossover. And you know, it's interesting. Speaking of Seven Sermons to the Dead, I think that's the first part of the Red Book that got published
Yes.
because it's in the um, autobiography, biography, whatever you want to call it. I think it's like a in the appendix is his writings there until and the Red Book. So it comes from the Red Book, right? But the Red Book wasn't published until 2009, I think. So that's the first part of the Red Book that got published, is my understanding. And it is fascinating, that text.
It is. It is. So can we spend a minute or two on that?
Yeah.
Um, you know, what it is that it is he's telling a story. And he's telling a story. He's doing something. It actually belongs in the Red Book, because just like in the Red Book, his mandalas capture in this one image really profound actions that are going on and interactions that are going on within an individual. He's doing the same thing. So amount of his thought that is captured in that book is just stunning, stunning. And you started by talking about the spirituality. I mean, nowhere I see the spirituality come through, and see the connection between spirituality and the core insights that
Hmm.
he has better. than in the Red Book. Please go on.
Yeah. There was something very palpable that was happening there, right? Something full of vitality when he was working on the Red Book. And it seemed to have what became the Red Book um, seemed to have been precipitated by his separation from Freud. And because he was so involved in the psychoanalytic movement, and Freud was basically his mentor at that time. There was this very close relationship. But because Jung was becoming more interested in the esoteric, I mean, he always had been, but because he was continuing to be interested in the esoteric and in the mythological and in spirituality, it was a rift in their dynamic. And when Jung published the Symbols of Transformation, the what we would call now the Collected Works Five, Freud basically ended their relationship, and Jung was basically shunned out of this psychoanalytic movement that he was deeply rooted in. I mean, it was like had been the president of the association, and he was looked up to in a lot of ways. But as he stood to his own voice and his own interests, Freud, disagreed. They disagreed on some fundamental levels, and the way they managed that was to just stop, end their relationship essentially. And it was very disorienting for Jung, and um, you know, it affected him, is my understanding. And part of what came out of that, it seems, is this emergence of new material born out of this disorientation. People use different terms for what he went through at that time, starting around 2000, starting around 1913. I like the term creative illness. I think that's an interesting term, that he had a creative illness that was per se an illness, but was also generating something creative, sort of born out of this separation with Freud and the pain that it evoked in Jung, that this Red Book came out of it, you know, and this flow of images and this flow of fantasy and emotion, that it did something for him. He says that the material that came out of that period was enough for more than a lifetime's work. And a lot of his later work was trying to make sense of that, to translate that experience into a modern lexicon, conceptual ideas that could be shared and made sense of, and these kinds of things. But something was happening there that, like I talked about my dreams where like the gate opened.
Mm-hmm.
I do think this happens for certain people. It's like a gate opens, and it's not always a good thing. But if it becomes a creative process, then it can produce um, a new life, a new attitude, a new experience. And I do think that's part of what was happening with Jung. It was like, yeah, that something opened there, and something came through. However, we make sense of that. You know what I mean?
Yes. So what happened after you started going to Jorge's meetups?
Well, I remember the Bryant Park too. That image is also like burned in my. I actually had my first mandala dream was the fountain that's at the corner of that park was in the center of this image. It was like a mandala image of a square, but that fountain was in the center. Um, and that was an important time for me too, because I was trying to find my own orientation in in what was coming through for me in my dreams. And so the next step was the Young Foundation and taking classes there, which I really enjoyed, and finding a different analyst, which was important. And in terms of the milestones, one of the next pieces. So basically, my dream life became very active, but I didn't really understand how to work with dreams. So it was more that I developed a practice of dream journaling. That's what came out of that. I didn't really know how to make sense of dreams, but I started um, remembering them and capturing them and like sitting with them, and and then starting to learn about Jungian psychology and taking classes. And one of the first things I learned about was typology, like Jung's psychological types, collected work 6. And this was a really cool experience. At the time, I was working on a show, a Broadway show called Spider-Man, Turn Off the Dark. And I was playing in that pit orchestra in New York. And so I was around musicians all day. And the general conversation in that culture is like about music, talking about other gigs or albums that come out, or what people are up to in this sort of musical context. Um, and that wasn't really. I was sometimes frustrated by that because I was becoming very interested in Jungian psychology. But when I found psychological types and started diving into that, I had this really incredible experience where I took one of these tests online that you can take for free. There's so many of them now, and learned my type and read about it and thought to myself, "Oh yeah, that sounds like me." It was like, yeah, they have a pretty good handle on some basic parts of my personality. So I brought that in to the Spider-Man crew, to the orchestra, and some of my friends took an online version of the test. And you find that they're like Myers-Briggs test or Jungian typology test online. And what I found was other people had different typologies, and when they would read their own typology, they would say same thing I said. Oh yes, this sounds like me. This is a pretty good characteristic of basic, typical parts of my personality. But I would read their type, and I would say, well, that really doesn't sound like me, right? It sounds quite different. What's being emphasized from their perspective, or how they're approaching things, or the challenges or the strengths. And it was kind of like a light bulb moment because I think, oh, here we are sharing this physical reality. We were all literally sharing this physical space in the orchestra space. But it struck me, psychologically, there are ways that we are occupying different spaces and having different experiences that's not apparent on the surface. It's not apparent immediately. Um, and that became real for me when I would read somebody else's type, if that person identified with their type, and I would read that type and I didn't identify with that type, but I would identify with my type and they would read mine and they wouldn't identify with mine. And I thought, my God, wow, we're seeing the world differently. So that was a pivotal moment for me of, um, Jung says in terms of therapy, one of the greatest mistakes that a therapist can make is to assume that their client's personality is the same as theirs, that the client sees the world and situations the same way that they do, or values the world and situations. So it's a huge mistake to assume that in a clinical setting. But even in a more social setting, it's true as well. We're not having the same experience. We're not filtering in the same way. Our active perception is not the same. And so that was really eye opening for me, to recognize that. That was a big moment for me.
I don't know, Aiden, would you like to share what your type is and what it means and what the functions are within the
Oh
type?
yeah,
How, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, because you're deep in that too, and thinking
Yeah,
about this.
that was one of the, like, after Seven Sermons to the Dead, the biggest thing that I got into was the Jungian functions. And I really like Jung's own approach to his functions as compared to MBTI, for example, because Jung is always focused on the self, the wholeness of the self. And he sees the dominant functions, the first function and the second function, in the context of this entire symphony of functions that you do have, and which actually you develop over time. So individuation is a lot about kind of development of your weaker functions over time, um, really getting appreciation of functions which are very different from you, the entire experience that you are describing. I mean, for me, it did a couple of things. One is that it gave you it gave me a yardstick of saying, oh, you know what, I'm a little bit higher than most people around me on this thing, and I'm a little bit lower on this thing. So it gave me some kind of a scale. That was one thing. So it's very useful for self-understanding of saying, okay, what are my strengths, and what are the things which are fluent to me, which come naturally to me, which energize me, as opposed to things that are harder for me, which I'm not particularly good at, which I find draining for me.
Mm.
So it's one part of it is kind of self-understanding, but the other part that you're describing is also a very large part of it is you get to understand the other people, because by nature, not just psychologists, but everybody tends by default to just say they are the same type. And then why are they acting this way? And it makes no sense
Mm.
to you. And people will get angry and upset with people. But once you realize that they are approaching things differently, it gives you a much better way of dealing with people as such.
So true. And I think that that's part of where his development of the typology came from, because he was seeing differences in people and wanting to make um, people more understandable to each other. You know, when he would see in a very practical way, like a couple that's having couple problems, how to help them see each other's point of view better. And and also in his own world, like trying to understand his differences with Freud, because you know, Freud seems to have been an extrovert and Jung was an introvert. And so um, part of his development of what became psychological types and Jung's typology was these basic rifts that people have in human relationship, and how can we understand each other better and communicate better. And it's very practical in that sense. But it also has this, I like what you're adding too, like the personal development piece of um, where are my strengths and where are the places that I want to grow. And also on the topic of typology, um, there's an important point. It's a difficult subject to read. Like if you read the collected works 6, the psychological types, it's quite a book to get through. I mean, it's like 700 pages or something. And he's um, summarizing a lot of reading, like a lot of reading that he's done across history, looking at how people have typed, or how thinkers in the past have typed psychology in the past. And he's trying to synthesize these ideas or contrast them and then develop his own thing. And you know, and he goes into, you start to see the multidisciplinary aspect of Jung, I think, really in this book, because suddenly he's talking about Hindu philosophy, and then he's talking about Taoism, and then he's talking about William James, and then he's talking, you know, whoever. It's like no one's off the table in that book, and it's almost overwhelming to read it. Thank God, the last section of the book, he finally gets to the topic, and just says, and this is, you know, he describes the types like at the very end of the book, um, what they look like in practicality. And then at the end, he gives some definitions, thank God. So you can look up the definitions of the words that he's using. But it's a hard book to get through. Von Franz, there's a book called On Typology that Von Franz and James Hillman worked on together. It's 2 lectures that became 1 book. But Von Franz's lecture on the book On Typology, very excellent resource for learning about typology. And it's also, like, you know, smattered in Jung's writings. In his collected works, he talks about typology in various settings and contexts. But having said that, what I do think is really important about typology for personal development is this idea that it maintains our connection to the unconscious. So just like Jung has this idea that yes, a person maybe could theoretically integrate all of their shadow, like, which is the equivalent of saying personal unconscious. Yes, there could be this incredibly insightful human being that's able to unpack all of their personal wounds and history and integrate it, but there's still unconsciousness beyond that, like what Jung would talk about as the syzygy, anima, animus, and the self. So, so just like in that setup of the personality, ego, shadow, anima, anima, animus, self, there's a typological equivalent. You say, okay, yes, a person could have a very strong dominant function, and then a very strong auxiliary function, and then even develop into the tertiary function or the auxiliary inferior function, but never will a person fully integrate their inferior function. And in fact, in a lot of cases, if you can't tell what your type is or what someone else's type is, sometimes their inferior function is a really good clue because you see, their sensation function, for example, is so weak, they're unable to hold on to facts or physical experiences in the present. And so you say, oh, their sensation function is inferior, and that gives you a sense of their superior function.
Yes.
So
No,
you,
excellent. Okay, can I say some things?
yeah, yeah.
So no, this is just fantastic. And one of the things I found, your observation in the on the meetup description is very
Mm,
good, that he opened up many, you know, gold mines. He explored many things, and I think the types are like that.
mm,
There is a lot of work that has gone on. So, like, one of my favorite people is on this is a guy called Michael Pierce, who has done who actually presents it. I had him here presenting on his book.
mm,
He did, I think, a couple of meetups on his book. Um, but the way he presents types is very interesting. He has his videos, and he just shows you, what people look like, so he's describing it in so many different ways, visually, sound wise,
mm.
and with so many different metaphors that put together, you begin to grasp, because what you're trying to describe is a human being is incredibly complex. And to say that, that you're a certain type, you need to have these kind of multiple perspectives from which you say, oh, it's like this. And you're absolutely right, the weaknesses
Yeah,
are the strongest keys, because it's very easy to say, oh, this is strong and this is strong. Which one is first and which one is second? But then when you look at the weakest one, that gives you a very strong clue of
yeah.
that. Yes.
And you know what, Shrikant, it strikes me that's such an incredible and humbling part of this this topic of type development is that you think about it, your strongest function and your inferior function are opposites. So from a Jungian perspective, opposites are really important. Jung so much talks about the problem of the opposites and the importance of um, their synthesis or a transcendent experience where the opposites can kind of coalesce into something where they can coexist instead of oppose each other. But their initial state is one of opposition in many cases, and the opposition creates a lot of energy and often drama. So with the functions, it's such a great example of that because if I'm a thinking type, okay, so I'm an INTP, so I'm an introverted thinking type, and my extroverted feeling is inferior, and so the very difficult thing when you want to face your um, inferior function is imagine here's someone, for me it's thinking, right, is more developed, and feeling is if the microphone top is average, it's like my thinking's up here but my feelings here. So how do they meet? To lean this direction means to lean away from this direction. So what do you do? And von Franz talks about this in the on typology lecture, and I love it. You have to kind of like um you have to allow your superior function to come down. Like you have to let go of your habitual mode of being, to let go of your comfortability, and allow that to be quieted and lowered to meet the feeling function. And it's quite an upset, right? Because this is where I'm confident. Like this is where I feel good about myself, and I feel competent and confident and all those things. This down here, I don't feel that confident. But it creates a suspense of the superior function to come down and allow the other stuff to come up, and that's where you get something like the Red Book, right? To a rational mind, a thinking mind, it sounds insane. It doesn't make sense. What is this? It's there's no logic. There's no, what's really interesting, very interesting sidebar. Um, he wrote the Seven Sermons to the Dead in 2016. it was the same year that he wrote oh gosh, what was it? Individuality.
1916, right?
1916.
Yep.
I might be saying that, that's what I meant to say, but there's another article, Individuality, Something, and Collectivity. Um, Great article that he wrote in 1916. And but if you read the two of them next to each other, you think these are different authors. You know, the one about individuality and collectivity, it's rational. He's got bullet points, things are numbered, it's logical. It's like couldn't be more rational and abstract. And meanwhile, the same year, Seven Sermons from the Dead, you have these images and these preaching going on to these dead figures and visitation from the beyond. It's irreconcilable. So I think this is what happens. It's like when somebody is interested in their integration of the inferior function or their relationship to the inferior function, it's going to be at odds with your developed mode of being and your comfortable mode of being. And it's quite an upset to do that.
Aiden,
So
this
it's
is really fascinating theme. Let's spend some time on this one.
sure.
So firstly, let's look at Jung, and then I have some general points. But Jung, what type did Jung think he was? What do you think his type was? And which of these modes was more natural to him?
He alluded to being a thinking type as well, an introverted thinking type. So he would have described himself as an introverted thinking intuitive type,
Mhm.
who didn't have too. He says, "I didn't have too good a relationship with reality." So sensation would be his tertiary function, inferior or auxiliary inferior function, and he always had trouble with feeling. So he seems to be an introverted thinking type, um, same as von Franz as well. But you hear other people with different theories. I mean, um, clearly his intuition was very strong. Um, so I think it's safe to say intuition and thinking for him were stronger than sensation and feeling.
Mhm.
Um, but what do you think?
I don't know. I don't know about that. I mean, because I've not spent enough time on him. But what I want to do is I want to come back to the point that you're making about this higher function has to come down.
Yeah.
Um, this idea, I think, is very deep part of Jung,
Mm,
of saying, in Seven Sermons to the Dead, that's the terrible god Abraxas.
right. Yeah.
Okay, it is the one who is now. I cannot, I have to use the religious background because actually that captures it the best.
Mm,
It is the higher emptying itself for the lower. It is the love of the higher for the lower, so that which actually mediates between heaven and earth. It's like heaven coming down to meet earth. And it is that which is between that brings the heaven and earth together
yeah.
as being the mediator between that. And you have to go down, in the filth it will be found. Because if you said, oh, this is my weakness, I'm going to stay away from it, you're losing something of the whole. And if you want to be whole, you have to go through that. So I really like the way in which you put it, that the higher coming down, you have to kind of let it come down to, so it's the virtue of kind of humility. In a sense, that's what you're doing when you're actually listening to another person. You're letting, at the deepest level, you're just letting that person occupy your consciousness for a
True.
short period of time, because you're trying to see who they are. You're trying to keep aside your preconceptions of what you think people are, what you think you are, and simply saying yes to them, to let that come in. And then you're speaking to them, which is actually offering yourself to them. So this idea of even conversation, a true, authentic conversation, has those elements in it. What do you think?
I agree. It brings up a point for me that Jung's approach to psychology, I would say, is much more intra-psychic. It's much more about being in concert with oneself and having relationship with one's own parts, whether they're complexes or archetypal material. It's intra-psychic. It's more about the individual in the way that it's written about, anyways. But I love what you're bringing because I actually think it's a very important point, and that Jung's writings don't always express it as much as I wish that they did, which is this interpersonal piece, right? The other is not just in me, the other is also in front of me. Srikant is an other in my world, right? When I think of us as two separate subjects, from my vantage point, I could say, I'm the subject and you're an object. And from my vantage point, I could say, I'm the subject and my complexes are the objects, or my archetypes are the objects. So there's objects outside of me and objects inside of me. But Jung seems to focus on the objects inside of me and in the objects of religion and archetypal objects. Whereas I think what you're saying, and which I think is very important, there is also an other outside of me, and the interaction there is very important. So, and making space for that other and relationship to that other. I mean, in some ways, that's at least as important, right, as being a relationship to myself. I think that's a great point.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Aiden. All right. So what did you do next?
Okay.
Or what were the, I know this is, this is the nature of the conversation, because partly we are talking about your journey, partly we're talking about Jung, what Jung has to offer us. So I'm kind of going, we'll do about an hour of this. You can always come back and we can do more
Love
talk,
it.
but I just want to make sure that everything that you're putting on the table, we savor it. And doing that well is much more important than trying to capture everything.
Yeah,
So we'll go on for another 20 minutes or so, and then I want to
sure.
get other people's questions. So folks, keep your questions ready. You'll have plenty of opportunity, a whole hour of raising your questions or making any comments. All right. So Aiden, what were the other big milestones that came next for you?
Well, first, I want to say I appreciate your strategy in the flow of the conversation, because one of the challenges I have with Jungian psychology is it's quite a forest. I mean, it's quite, we talk about the forest for the trees. There are
Mhm.
so many trees in that forest, and they're beautiful trees. So it's so possible to zoom very far in and also to zoom very far out. And I find it difficult to manage that, like the zooming in and the zooming out. But I'm glad we zoomed in on the typology stuff, because that's rich. And if I was to think of next milestones, I would say that it was a lot of the meetup groups and classes and reading at that time. I was reading a lot of Jung, and taking a lot of notes. So I was reading a lot of Jung and highlighting a lot of different things. And essentially, I think for okay, I'm actually going to dovetail on the typology thing, because I think it's important for like the next milestone. I was raised in a way that I think my type was a bit distorted. Von Franz talks about this, and Jung talks about this too. In certain environments that are not conducive to like natural development, it, it's possible that a child could take on like a typology that's different from their nature, for example. And I grew up in a household of feeling types. There were no thinking types in my household. And I had sort of adopted a feeling type approach to life in a lot of ways. Um, so when I discovered the types and I started reading, I didn't know this at the time, but as I continued to read through his collected works and try to make sense of the forest of Jungian psychology, I think in some ways it was my unconscious attempt of winning back my thinking side, because you can't wrestle with that material deeply without thinking about it. It necessitates an incredible amount of thought, and all the way from the terms that he's using to the theory that he's using and how it all fits together. So as I'm reading um, from the collected works, just starting to get a sense of what Jung thought. And I think in some ways it was sort of developing my thinking function, which is a natural part of my psyche, but got left behind. So in that process of developing my thinking function, what did I, I've gone down so many rabbit holes with him. It's kind of hard to pinpoint key ones. I think since there's limited time left, the other thing I definitely want to highlight is dreams, because that's become a big topic for me, and it's an incredible marriage of the practical side of what Jung was about and the theoretical side, right? Because if you're going to work with a dream, uh, it's important to have some theoretical understanding, some points of reference of how to work with a dream, or the language of dreams, like Jung talks about. But at the end of the day, it's also very practical. It's like working on something tangible with somebody, and hopefully supporting their journey of wanting to understand their own unconscious better, wanting to understand their own psyche better, understanding if there's guidance that they're getting, or compensation that they're getting, or modified memories that they're getting, or awarenesses that they're missing in their waking consciousness that the dream is bringing to the fore. That's very practical. And so I've found, Jung says somewhere that dreams are the best tool we have in the building up of the personality. And I think you could make a case for that. I mean, dreams are one way that the unconscious express. Okay, so this is how I think about it. When we're awake, similar to our thinking of the superior function, right? It's like when we're awake, our mind, I think of it like flashlight on a beam mode. That's how your attention is, right? Like it's focused. You can focus on something at the exclusion of what's around it. You can sort of manage your attention and focus your attention, and it requires a lot of energy, but that's what we do when we're awake. We have pretty structured thoughts, and we have pretty structured days, and our attention is relatively coalesced into a relatively focused beam of interest, or what have you. But when we go to sleep, it's like the flashlight goes into spread mode, like it spreads out. And so, sure, it's a little hazier. The lines are blurred, but we can see more territory. So the dreams, like psychedelics or like vision experiences, essentially like the superior function going down to encounter the other functions, it dissolves the ego slightly enough that more aspects of the personality are visible, even if they're slightly visible. And you really get to know more what's happening in the landscape of your own psychology. It's fascinating. I'm in multiple dream groups, and I work with clients now on dreams, and I run in my own dream group, and it never stops to amaze me how much wisdom, honest to God, intelligence, it seems, or intelligence potential or meaning potential, however you want to put it, is in the dreaming mind. So it's very practical, and I would say that's the other thing I would want to highlight with the time that we have, probably.
Wow. Um, I liked several terms that you used. One term that you used regarding the dreams was gate had opened.
Yeah.
Then you talked about dream life. Then you talked about the dream journaling.
Yeah.
So what is it? Say a little bit more about this gate opening. What is it that keeps the gate closed? So this opening, because there is, you know, we have kind of parts of us which are ossified that kind of hold everything
Yes.
back. And then, like, once they kind of dissolve, a lot of life kind of springs up
Yeah.
on its own. It's not as if you're kind of pushing it, but it just, it just kind of, comes out. That so that's, you can pick any of these themes that you would like to build on. The second is that I really like the term dream life, because, you know instead of relinquishing dreams to this, oh, this is what I dreamed, and this is not my real life, this is just a dream life seems to honor the the continuity and the sequence of what is happening in dreams, and trying to integrate that, connect that with your life. So it seems to be like, even the term itself is a way of honoring the unconscious and giving it the due respect, instead of just ignoring it and forgetting about it. And looks like the term that you used of dream journaling is actually a way of bringing the consciousness systematically to bear on this. So feel free to build on any of these three.
All that's great stuff. Um, well, maybe I'll start with the gate opening piece, because what came to my mind was actually from somebody else, something I learned from Gabor Mate,
Mhm.
who's become a very popular voice in trauma and trauma healing, um, and psychosomatic work. And, he's really an interesting thinker. Uh, but I've trained with his modality, and the way he expresses it is that it's like a crustacean. So that's the metaphor. I love this metaphor. It's like a crustacean. So how does a crustacean grow? Because it's stuck by the size of its shell. The only way that a crustacean can grow, according to him, and I think this is true, is that it has to molt. It has to crack the shell. It has to um, put itself in a vulnerable position, very vulnerable position, and crack its defenses, so to speak, um, to be in this liminal space that allows for a larger shell, um, and therefore a larger perspective. In psychological terms, you probably say a bigger ego, a more developed ego, not a bigger ego, but a more developed ego. So we're restricted um, the by our own vulnerabilities and our own defenses against overwhelmment and difficulty, right? It could be overwhelming through feelings or overwhelming through circumstances, but we sort of have this, whatever size we're living in corresponds with some developmental happenings, right, in our past. And so there's this idea that we have to do some version of that if we're going to grow. It means making oneself vulnerable. And if we don't do it, sometimes God will, I mean, or life will, or however you want to put it. But whether we participate or not, life has a way of cracking our defenses and our shells at certain times, and then the gates open. So one of the cool things about dream work, in my point of view, is it allows us to cooperate with that process. We get to cooperate, right? If I'm saying, "Hey, unconscious, I'm paying attention to you. I want to understand, your vantage point and not just my ego's vantage point, or I want to hear more from you, and take into consideration the point of view of the unconscious, like you were saying, Shrikant. If my actions and my intentions showcase that attitude, then I may be able to avoid certain disasters or certain circumstances, or um, uh, you know, get learnings out of that allow me to not have to get more learnings out of another relationship going poorly, or another painful experience at work, or something like that, where um, my shell has to get cracked by life circumstances. There's this idea of, if we participate in our own process, um, we can turn a lot of difficult corners, is the way that Jung puts it. And it's true. I think it's true. Um, yeah. So I just love that crustacean. And the other image that comes to my mind always is the butterfly one, which is a bit probably overused, but similar with the caterpillar into the butterfly. It's like, how does it happen? Well, the caterpillar has to dissolve. I mean, or the caterpillar has to essentially lose its form and its identity to make a way for the butterfly to become. So that's a whole story in it itself. But there's this sense of um, when we have our former structures, I tend to think of them as defenses or beliefs or attitudes or strengths. Um, they are simultaneously walls against flexibility or new orientations and attitudes. And the unconscious has a way of directing a person towards what um, might be the most beneficial to learn or what might be the most beneficial to integrate. And it can happen in dreams and it can happen in life circumstances. Um, but cooperating with our dream material, I think, helps us turn some difficult corners. That's how I would put it.
Excellent. Excellent. Aiden, I can talk to you for a long, long, long
I
time.
feel similar.
But I want to give a chance for other people to talk to you. So folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to ask a question to Aiden or to make a brief comment. Let's keep the comments relatively brief so we can cover, we can get as many voices on the table as possible. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. We'll start with David Bloom. David. David, I think your mic is not working.
Can you see
Uh,
him? I feel like I can't see him.
I can see him. He's
Oh,
okay.
there he is.
Right. All right. David, if your mic is not working, I would recommend just leaving and coming back. We'll have somebody else go first, and then we will, that's probably the easiest way of fixing the mic problem. All right. Let's go with Evanique. Evanique, go ahead.
Hi, Aiden. Thank you so much for coming today. It was a really interesting topic. And I have kind of a hybrid question. You were talking in the end about growth and vulnerability, and then integrating that with dreams. Do you think that dreams also require a certain type of vulnerability? And just what I mean by that is, vulnerability, I guess, to interpret dreams and apply it to real life, because sometimes you could just dismiss a dream as just a dream and it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Anik. Um, that's an interesting question. The vulnerability um, and the dreams. I would say that it does apply um, because I guess I didn't go into this so much, but the way I understand um, Jung's theory of personality, right? If you think about like his psychological understanding, we have two centers. It's kind of a strange way of putting it, but we have an egoic center and the center of self. The analogy that he uses that I love is the solar system. So you have the sun at the center of the solar system, and then this sort of circumference of the solar system, and the ego is kind of not at the center; it's off to the side, orbiting the sun. But where we live, metaphorically, if you follow the solar system metaphor, we live on the earth. That's where our feet touch the ground. That's where our houses are. That's what our existence is. So it's very easy to think that our experience is the center, that we are living in the center at the earth. Even historically, that's how we've experienced it with like a geocentric universe where the earth is the center. But Jung psychology says, well, actually, there's two centers in the human psyche. There's the ego center, which he's, metaphorically connecting to the earth. And there's the self organization and center that he's metaphorically connecting to the sun. So what it means is at a certain point in life, if we want to see the whole picture of the solar system, if we want to see the whole picture of our personality, so to speak, it's a relativization of the ego. Because you say, actually, what I think and what I'm used to and what I believe is central and true. Hang on a second, maybe something else is true, or maybe I'm not seeing the full picture, or maybe there's a attitude I need to let go of, or a perspective I need to let go of. And it's very, I would, in my experience, it can be very vulnerable to do that. Um, it's asking somebody to change potentially deep parts of themselves to have a different perspective, to have a different orientation. Um, but that's a very theoretical way of putting it. A lot of it depends on what actually shows up in your dreams. Very often, dreams will. I'll give an example from a dream, right? To just to give it some grounding in the dream world. A lot of people have dreams where they're getting chased by a character, getting chased by or attacked by um, some kind of character that they can't see so well, and they're trying to escape, and it's terrifying. And it's like a very common dream motif. In my experience, it's not always the case, but in my experience, very often when we have these figures that seem antagonistic in our dream life, if we change our attitude about them, if we change our attitude about those images and dreams. So, for example, people will come to me sometimes and say, I just want to stop these dreams to stop. I keep having this dream. I just want them to stop. I want to stop having this scary dream. And when I work with them, what we'll often do is say, okay, what if it's wanting to make contact with you? What if it actually it has an important message and we're missing it because we're trying to run away from it? So what would it look like to say, hey, and mind you, this is a person who's terrified of this type of dream, right? So it's not, this is the vulnerable part, Ebony. This is not a fun part to do this. It's vulnerable and humble, but you say, okay, you know what? Tonight, I'm going to invite this character in. I'm going to invite this dream. I'm going to be present. If you're trying to tell me something, please tell me. And I want to know, and I'm scared, but I'm willing to hear you out. And even that, I kid you not, can change a person's dream life because their attitude has changed, and therefore what they receive in their dreams also changes. It's fascinating. Does that answer your question, Ebony?
Yeah, absolutely. That was great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. David, you're next. Please take your time. What do you have to, what questions, what comments, anything that you have, please take your time.
Hello, everyone. We're taking an outer journey into the Santa Barbara Mountains, so hopefully we're not disconnected, but we're also taking an inner journey with all you tonight. So it's just been a lot of fun. My family is in the car and the dog, and we've been listening to this. It's absolutely riveting. And before I make some comments and questions, I just need to say that studying for as long as I have, Aiden just strikes me as just one of the world's leading thinkers in terms of taking the forest and carving a very practical journey for people. I'm so impressed by him, and I'm so glad you have him as a guest. Just incredibly insightful person. I'm also fascinated on his focus on dreams, because those really are messages and communications from our unconscious. But if you live in a culture that doesn't teach you that, then it's just very foreign to you. And it just strikes me that you have to have meetup groups and Jung societies to understand that. And the general culture is just unaware that every day, every night, we're getting, call it divine communication. And that just blows my mind. And I love Aiden's focus on that. And I guess my question, Aiden, is from a practical standpoint, what are habits you developed to help you sort of interpret, your dreams? What sort of works for you and what doesn't work? I'm just like, from a practical standpoint, what are you doing?
Yeah, that's great. First of all, thank you for your encouraging words, and it means a lot. And I love seeing your face pop up when it pops up in all kinds of different colors and backgrounds. I love it in all of its forms. Yeah, the practical side of dreams, I will say I'm still in the process of that. I kid you not, I have about 80 books on dreams now, which is not an exaggeration. And what I keep finding is there are many ways to approach dreams, right? So it kind of depends. Robert Johnson's Inner Work is an accessible book that people use for dreams and active imagination. Jung, there's a book that's edited that has a compilation of Jung's writings on dreams just called Dreams. There's The Way of the Image is a documentary. It's an interview style documentary where von Franz is interviewed about dreams. It's like 10 hours. You can find it online for free, but 10 hours of incredible dream work that you can just watch. And they made a book out of it too. Fraser Boa wrote it, but it's still the interview with von Franz. It's just condensed into a book. But there's so many other ways too, like Robert Bosnak has his embodied imagination, or there's a book called let your body tell you your dreams, or something like that. And there's indigenous approaches. I was talking the other day to someone who's got a totally different background and was raised with a whole other perspective on dreams. So there's just so many, there's the biblical part of it too. And there's just so many approaches. So for me, it's a lot of what you said though, actually, David, interestingly, a lot of it is just saying, you know what, I'm going to take dreams seriously and I'm going to make it a part of my journey to actively work to understand them, or to find ways that other people are understanding them. And actually, what I should have said first is there is an association, the International Association for the Study of Dreams, and they do events, and there you can find much information on their website about thought leaders on dreams in the contemporary scene, and authors and modalities. So the International Association for the Study of Dreams is great, but I think just taking it seriously in the first place, like just saying, you know what, I'm gonna be someone who considers dreams as valuable and works for their insights, and you'll find a way into it. You'll find your way into it.
Thank you. Thank you, Aiden. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to ask a question or make a brief comment. Next up is going to be Judy, Joel, and Victor. Judy, go ahead.
Hi, Aiden. Thank you. Very interesting. I guess my question is really very similar to what David just asked, because I was thinking, like, what kinds of things could a person do if they wanted to explore their dreams? I was looking into this a little bit recently. Actually, that's why I'm even in this group, because then I was like, okay, let me go here. Because I had some dreams. I'm like, there's stuff going on here. I don't know how to make sense of this. And then if you look up online and you say, what does this mean in a dream? Or what if you have a dream about this or that? You get all these different reasons, and you're like, that's probably not it. And I didn't really feel scared, but I guess if I describe it, it's scary. So one thing I did read was that if you write it all down and then maybe look at it like a week later, or let some time go by. I don't know, does that make sense to you? I'm just trying to build on what you already gave us for ideas for using dreams.
That's another one, certainly. I think just the act of writing it down, like just capturing it, is a really very valuable practice. I almost would call that like step one. Actually, step one, I would say, is just setting the intention um, to capture your dreams. Like very often when I work with people on their dreams, one of the places, or I do a group with dreams, well, that's where we'll start is getting some kind of dream journal and putting it by their bed, and just on the front page putting some kind of intention, some kind of their own mantra. Why are you inviting your dreams in, or what does it sound like for you to invite your dreams in, or just something that puts onto paper that there's an interest in receiving dreams, and then using your journal or whatever, your phone or some kind of recorder, and capturing your dreams is such a great first step. So you doing that, I feel like, is already like the first two steps.
I did
Um,
notice that if you write it down, all of a sudden you're writing it and you realize that you had been carving away so many pieces. And then as you're writing it, you're like, but then there was this and this and this. And then it's like really, it helps it to solidify. Otherwise it slips away the next day. You don't really remember all the details unless you've written it down.
Next piece, since we're on that topic, Judy, if I was to say what's next in terms of that process that we're talking about here, the next thing I would say is like date your dream, obviously, so you know when it happened. And after you've written it down, give it a title. If you had to essentialize it, because a lot of times dreams start to feel amorphous, or it's like multiple scenes, or things are happening. So it can be really beneficial to say, if I title, what would the title of this dream be, and put that at the top. That's a really interesting exercise.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Aiden, and thank you, Judy. Great question. Next up is going to be Joel, followed by Victor. Joel.
Yeah, thanks to both of you for this. This is the first thing I wanted to join up with others and talk about Jung and types and stuff and dreams for a long time. So glad this finally came through on the Philly practical group, got cross-posted.
Oh, cool. Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure who did it, but anyway, I'm very interested in a couple of ideas. I'm not sure which one you'll leap off on. One is the idea of the interpersonal aspect of particularly the subconscious. Like I have read hardly anything in Jung, but the little bit I read about the collective subconscious was it tends to sort of feel like past to me, like the accumulation of like myths from the past. But what about the ongoing unfolding of a collective subconscious? Um, and some of it is about time because I grew up in a heavily biblical, and there's this thing of like, is there, we're going to cross over into another world in the future, and then we have these like ideas of portals, in popular culture between, the scary world, and there's a portal between it, um, and there's the whole idea of like superimposition of the material world and the non-material world, like in the moment. So I've been thinking about the shadow self in, socionics has this dual personality, everyone's has their dual. And I've been playing with the idea of my dual being actually me, but in that world of imagination. And so if you can just say something, and I noticed you referred to dream groups. Can you say a little bit about like how, to what extent telling other people is important?
Yeah. I'll start with that part and then I'll go backwards. The telling other people about dreams, and the value of that is we've lost it largely, right, at a cultural level,
Mhm.
but there are many cultures that consider it to be something baked into culture, right? There's the temples of Asclepios, like in sort of Hellenistic or Greek culture, of that people go and incubate dreams for healing or for prophecy.
Mhm.
Um, or there's many groups of cultures that live in smaller communities where the dreams are active, like um, and dream sharing is built into the culture. It can be a way to evolve ritual. It can be a way to evolve mythology in a community. It can be a way to avoid disasters or find fertile grounds or all kinds of things. So there is a heritage of sharing dreams. In fact, there's a really cool story in Black Elk's autobiography where he had a big dream. It was like he because I should make this distinction. I didn't make this earlier, but there are dreams that are kind of anxiety dreams based on your daily life and sort of like clearly personal unconscious, like clearly just about your situations or things you're anxious about or things you're dealing with in your everyday life. And then there's other dreams that Jung would call big dreams that's where it gets archetypal. That's where it gets into the mythology that you were pointing to, like the mythology of the past, but where the mythology of the past becomes living in our own dream life. There can be, incredible images or mythological images or, these sort of transpersonal events. And Black Elk had an experience where he was a Sioux, it's part of the Sioux tribe, I think, but he had an experience where there was a horse ceremony in his dream, and it was at a time where the community wasn't doing that well, and it is very ornate, a dream of this very specific horse ceremony, and he held it to himself. He didn't share it for a period of time, and he found that after having that big dream and not sharing it, his own health suffered. He was feeling bad physically, and the community continued to kind of be in a bad state. And he eventually told someone, it would have been, a leader in the community, this dream. And they said, oh, you need to share this with the community. And they shared it and turned it into an actual ritual. So they took the dream, the big dream that Black Elk had, and they took the ritual and they implemented it into their culture. His health improved and the culture's health improved. So it has value in a communal sense. And again, we've
The
lost
coming of the kingdom. I think it's like the coming of the kingdom in my vernacular.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that goes to the other points. And I'll try to do this quickly, even though it's a big point. What you're talking about, the two domains that kind of coexist or how they relate. Jung definitely talks to that or speaks to that issue. I think everyone has to find their own terminology for how you make sense of that. But it is part of the wrestling to say, okay, there's this spiritual side to life and there's this material side to life, or there's this sort of like eternal side of life and there's this chronological, temporal side of life, and how do those coexist? It's a real wrestling. And Jung wrestles with that too, is what I want to say about that. But in dreams is one of the ways that those places intersect, I believe. That the temporal and the sort of transpersonal
Eternal, yeah.
can intersect. I do think that, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aiden. And thank you, Joel. Next up is going to be Victor, followed by Paul. Folks, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom.
Otherwise,
Victor.
it's going back to me and Shrikant.
Exactly. Victor.
Hey, thank you, Shrikant. Thank you, Aiden, for doing this. And I remember you talking about Jung. This was a few months ago, more than a year ago, I think. And you mentioned a couple of things that had an impact on me. And you spoke about how it's not perfection, but it's completeness. So that really stuck with me. And I have a two-part question. I think you answered a little bit of my first part about dreams and where to find these resources. So what I want to find out is there's a lot of literature from Jung and from his students and his disciples about his work and where to find a structured way to understand his thought, where to start.
Yeah.
So where to start? And a second part of my question is, are you offering any classes, courses, or anything that we can approach you? So that's my second part.
Awesome. Well, the first part, if you find the answer, please share it with me because I could sure use that. It's one of this, I think it's one of the unfortunate, um, I would like to say it's one of the unfortunate parts of Jungian psychology that he was so forward moving in his career. He's constantly, you know, um, moving towards new fields and new explorations and new ideas, and he never quite stopped to organize his point of view in like a good introductory way. I think my understanding is he just didn't really think that the general public was going to understand him for whatever reason. In Man and His Symbols, uh, the last book that he worked on, um, he collaborated with some of his like colleagues in Man and His Symbols. He just wrote the introduction, but it's like 100 pages. It's a long introduction, and then it's some of his colleagues that are understood his ideas and wrote other chapters. And he okayed the drafts of everyone's chapters, and he wrote the introduction before he died. I think he finished it like 10 days before he died. But the punchline of that story is that's the only thing he ever wrote, as far as I understand it, that was intended for the general public. And the only reason he actually did that was because he had a dream. I mean, originally, he did an interview with John Freeman on the BBC called Face to Face. You can find this online; it's for free. Face to Face, Jung. You can watch it on YouTube. But John Freeman interviewed him, and the response was so positive. John Freeman was like, we should do a book. Like, you should share your ideas with the world because people are interested in this. And he said no, because he didn't believe people were going to really make sense of what he was talking about. And then he had a dream that he was speaking, he was lecturing to a public, the general audience, or I'm so tired. He was speaking to an audience of the general public, and they were understanding him, like they understood him, and it was enough to be like, okay, I'll do this. But it was just at the end of his life. Like I said, he finished the introduction 10 days before he died or something like that. So there's no good full introduction from him for the general audience. The one that I recommend, I'll show you. I just think it's a good collection, the basic writings of C.G. Jung, and it's edited by Laszlo. It's just a good compilation of writings. There's many of these types of introductions, like The Essential Jung by Anthony Storr, I think edited that one, or the Viking Portable Library Jung, that was edited by Joseph Campbell. But this one I think is the one that I most recommend. And otherwise, it's tough, man. I mean, it's really a journey to make sense of it. I wish I had a better answer for you on that. Say it again.
We just have to dive into it.
I think so. And the downside is it just takes a lot of time and energy. But the positive side is you're going to find your own relationship to the material. Like, what I love about the journey for me is at this point, I think I have a decent understanding of Jung's ideas, but in some strange ways, it's also helped me find my own ideas, or what I agree with, or how I see things differently. So the journey is going to be, you think you're learning about Jung, but at a certain point, you're also learning what you think. And as to your second question, I am actually right now I'm fielding interests because I'm doing a dream group in a specific community, so it's not open. But if people that are here are interested in joining a dream group, email me, Aiden at aidenmoore.com, AIDEN at aidenmoore.com. And now that you've mentioned that, Victor, I'll start fielding some more interest because I'd love to start another group. And I also do work one-on-one right now in terms of dream work, and another modality that I do that's called compassionate inquiry. That's more somatic. But I hopefully will have more to offer as time goes too in terms of writings and courses because I'm passionate about the subject. And it's frustrating for me to not have better answers to like some of your questions, right? Like, where do we learn the basic ideas? And I don't know what to say because it's hard to find that. So I will hopefully have more to offer so I can have a better answer to that question.
Hey, yeah. Thank you so
And
much.
Victor,
Thanks.
nice to see you. It's been a long time.
I
Welcome.
know. Nice to see you. I'll try to be a regular over here.
Excellent. Now that we have got Jung, you have to be here. Next up is going to be Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, and thanks for the important conversation and the fact that you have so many books, 90 books on dreams, and you have Jung under your belt. It makes me feel like it's a big opportunity to ask dreams related questions. I had one in mind that you partially answered a few minutes ago about the different types of dreams and their source. But I want to elaborate on that with a question. I'll tell you a sort of a subjective way that it manifests to me, and I'd like to hear your comment about dream theories in general and Jung's in particular. That instead of two categories you might have mentioned, from the big dream, like the blackout dream and the anxiety dream, I sort of sense in myself three, and I wanted your opinion. There's the pure anxiety one of, or you might call in Charles Dickens, the undigested bit of beef that is just, oh, you ate something funny that day,
Yeah.
and or you had a little brush with a car, so you had a car accident. Very like obvious connections, a car accident dream. But then, like I had a dream where there was a person and they were covered in pine needles, and they were a person I never think about. So I put that in the category of, it's pretty deep actually, but it's very personal deep. Like what you might, I want to use the loaded term subconscious, but a manifestation of my subconscious of some work I haven't processed. And then there's a dream that just seems like I'm a channel, like something unrelated to my personal experience came through me. Now, how do you see that? How does Jung see that? Talk about that a little. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. I think you're dead on that there's more categories of dreams. I probably oversimplified it in the way that I categorized it, there are, and in fact, when Jung describes it, it's similar, right? There's so many types of material in the unconscious, and dreams seemed to be a communicator of all those types. They could be something that's prophetic, right? They could be something that's that you subliminally experienced that day that didn't consciously register and it shows up in the dream. It can be a modified memory from childhood that's sort of tacked onto a contemporary setting. It can be something that someone said that you took the wrong way and the dream is compensating for it. There's these different, or it can be this channel, like you're saying. I mean, I don't know I don't have a definitive categorical way of breaking it down, but punchline, I think you're dead on. I think it's more complicated than the two ways that I framed it. And I think your pine needle dream is interesting. What I will say that's probably more valuable answer is that how I think of dreams, how I teach them, is that when we consider that there is this kind of internal intelligence or this internal mirror or this internal guide of some kind, or spiritual mirror or spiritual guide, however you think of it, I like to think of that as the collage maker. So the collage maker, just like we might take a magazine, like we might take a People magazine, or if you're, my age, like a Highlights magazine, and cut out some words and cut out some images from that magazine and make our own story. Like we make our own image and we put things together that don't necessarily belong. We'll take the head of one person and put it on someone else, or we'll put someone in the air floating. So we can take the images of the magazine and build our own constructions. That's kind of part of what dreams do. They'll take your friend from the past. They'll take the image of pine needles. They'll cover them in pine needles. It's not arbitrary that that's happening, but it's the collage maker. So then you have to say, well, what does it mean? What does that person represent in my psyche, or that relationship represent in my psyche? What do pine needles mean? What's the tree they come from? What's the symbology? You know, the pines, that's as a whole area of exploration. Someone covered in pine needles, what does that mean? And you get to be interested in the collage maker's creation and say, what are you saying with this? And however you categorize it, you know what I mean? That's how I look at it, is to say, what are you expressing with the material of my life and the material of this world, to basically as vocabulary to express it to me. So that's how I think of it. Well, yeah, that's how I think of it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Paul. Great question.
Yeah.
Next up
I'm
is
really, I wish we had, like, this is the way my mind works. I'm already like, part of me is so sad to move on without digging into the pine needle friend dream, but another time, another place.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be an entire forest here, not just
Speaking of trees.
unclimb every tree. You'll have to jump from one tree top to the next. Next up is going to be Lisa. Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. This is my first time here. This is so wonderful. So thank you for doing this. We've been talking a lot about dreams, and I guess I want to continue on that theme if it's okay. I love dreams so much, and I think I've been doing a lot of it since I was little. But I don't know much about Jung, but I hear people have told me that I really, really should find out more about what he has to say. So when you talked about dreams earlier, I think the first person to ask a question tonight mentioned vulnerability. And I guess one of my concerns is that because of a traumatic experience I had when I was 19, I still, 30 years later, have dreams of the trauma. And it's upsetting that, I'm still having it. And I feel like my dream world is my true self. That's really, I feel like that's how I connect to my real self. But because of that trauma, I've had many, many dreams interacting with the person that caused it, I guess. And the whole question of, am I dreaming of a part of myself, like an embodiment of him, and have I linked up somehow my shadow to him because he did a bad thing to me? So I'm wondering if I'm creating and recreating this within myself, and the fact that it's happening so many times, I wonder if there's some question I'm trying to answer about it or get answered, or is this person literally like dreaming with me? Am I having these recurrences? Is that person also dreaming too? And are we like dreaming together? I know this is not exactly one question, but I just wanted to broach the topic because it's tough when you've had this interaction with a person in your daily life and it leaks into your dream life for 30 years.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm really grateful you bring that up, actually. And I think it's really important to bring up the trauma piece and how that can shape dreams. Because of your vulnerability, I feel comfortable. Like in my case, I still have nightmares, or I struggle with them over, it used to be worse, but it still happens sometimes, related to my relationship with my stepdad, who was a terrifying figure in my life, really, really quite mean. And that's a different category that I did not responsibly speak about earlier. I think that in trauma, it can be that certain things repeat themselves, like in our minds, like especially if they're charged with very strong emotions, and as a trauma response does, right? It kind of gets stuck or frozen in our body or in our minds, and so then it kind of recurs. I think of PTSD, for example. It's like where people have these recurring experiences. And I wouldn't say it's a shadow. It's not so much that it's a shadow of them being recreated in the trauma experience. It's just the trauma experience revisiting their psyche in some capacity, whether it's like a flashback or whether it's a nightmare. So then it begs the question, well, what do you do with the trauma stuff? And how do you work with it? There's one book called The Art of Transforming Nightmares that is organized around working with nightmare material. Ernest Hartman also has a book. I was just reading this earlier that also has to do with nightmares. I'm sorry that I think I have it in my bedroom, but I can also look it up very fastly. He's
Thank
a
you.
great.
I just typed The Art of Transforming Nightmares.
Oh, great.
Wrote that down, the title.
Yeah, she's a really oh yeah, Dreams and Nightmares. That one's a little bit more like researchy, but he's an interesting thinker about dreams. Yeah, I think The Art of Transforming Nightmares is probably a good one. There's also a book by Linda Schuller called PTS Dreams. I think that's very witty. PTS Dreams. And she has her own interesting ideas, but that's her focus as well, using dreams for processing trauma and sorting through trauma. So there are tools that use dreams to process things like trauma. But I'm really glad you brought that up because earlier when I was talking about, the idea of seeing someone else as a part of yourself, or if you get into shadow stuff or that kind of thing, it can be almost like exactly the wrong approach for somebody who has a traumatic experience where it's actually not about that. It's about just processing the intensity of what happened and finding a way to, well, really process it, metabolize it. And I do
Thank
think
you.
I do think dreams are one way that one strategy. Yes.
Thank you, Aiden, and thank you, Lisa. All right. So now, Aiden, the good thing is that there are no questions. I get to we get to continue. So, what other kind of encounters with Jung's ideas have really impacted you? If you have to talk about one or two more, what would you pick?
Well, I have come to enjoy I'm looking at my collected works and Jung specific stuff.
Let me ask you another way. I really sympathize with Victor. Actually, but this is not the case only with Jung. Actually, all great thinkers are like that because they are so busy producing stuff that they're not trying to kind of organize it for you.
Yeah.
They're just trying, busy exploring things. And so they will just go like a, meteor, and they will create all this stuff while going, because they're going wherever they want to go. And but what happens is that I think some of these people's work speak to you the most. So what are your favorite works of Jung?
Oh, okay. On the Nature of the Psyche, in the Collected Works 8, that's a really big one for me. I like the Philosophy of Life article. I think it's in the 16th Collected Works. And I like his idea of that that we all have such a thing, like a philosophy of life that you could call a worldview or an attitude, and that it influences both how we see things and how we relate to others. So becoming more aware of that, like taking a more conscious approach to, well, what is my philosophy of life? And I like that he advocates for that. I think children's dreams, and it might be partly because of my interest in dreams, but especially the last 100 pages are so rich. The way he works with um, archetypal material from children's dreams. And that's one that I really love. I love the undiscovered self. It's an interesting way to apply it in a more like social perspective. I've tried to get through a lot of his writings. I mean, the alchemical stuff I find interesting, but um, I'm lesser learned in that. Let me pull up my I started making a list to have a better sense of what are the things I really like. Oh, adaptation, individuation, and collectivity. That was the article that came out in 1916 that I was the same year as Seven Sermons of the Dead. His writings of on psychic energy is very interesting. I mean, I think that's the way he talks about energy and sort of the vitalistic undertones are very interesting.
Let me ask another question, which is actually trying to relate Jung to what we've been working on. We talked in the beginning about spirituality and Jung.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the what you see as, because you're so well read in Jung, how do you see the influence of religion and spirituality on Jung? What would you say about spirituality and Jung?
My impression of Jung is that he is this very inner, his focus is the inner world, but I would put the spiritual world in the same category. Yeah, like the spiritual world, the inner world, the contemplative, introspective, introverted world. And kind of like Lisa was saying, right? Like I sometimes there are some of us who feel that the inner world is primary. C.S. Lewis, for example, and you come across these people that talk about the inner world being the primary one, like Jung. And so I think you can see, like in his quote unquote autobiography, even early in his life, when he's talking about his early dreams and his early ritualistic behavior of, the way he would light fires and in this wall and keep his flame alive. And there was a ritual about it, or he had a mannequin that he hid in the attic and would write letters to in a secret language, building this library. And he had these practices that were almost ritualistic. And it's as if, his fantasy inner life was so rich that it was dominant. And my impression of his later work and in the way that it relates to that is that continuing to find a way. Eventually, he started to call that the psyche, right? The psyche is the reality of the psyche as a corollary to the material world, rather than only considering a materialistic universe. He would say the psyche is real, and that because of that fact that the psyche is real, there's this whole doorway open up to the spiritual experiences of the psyche. Like you talk about people that have spiritual experiences. Well, if the psyche is real and people are having phenomenological experiences of God or something transcendent or something numinous, people are having these experiences. Well, if the psyche is real, then it's a fact that happens. So it kind of opens up the door to the consideration of the interiority and the source of spiritual experiences that create such phenomenology. And that's where he gets into the archetypes and all kinds of material that you wouldn't get from a material universe only. And he said it was like in one of the articles in Modern Man in Search of the Soul, is that's the ultimate question of an individual, whether they have a relationship to eternity or not. For Jung, that's the ultimate question because he's an interiority guy. He's an inner life guy. So for him, the ultimate question is, do we have a relationship to the eternal? Or as he phrases it differently and in a different coloration, what myth am I living? These are big questions for Jung because he has such a strong inner world. and he wanted to make sense of the Christianity that didn't work for him, his father's Christianity that didn't work for him, and yet he believed there was this other domain that was very numinous, and had to kind of find his way into it. And then you start to see these concepts evolve, like archetypes and synchronicity, which is another way of saying where these two worlds coalesce, right? Where the archetypal world or the eternal world sort of coalesces or somehow shows up in the temporal mundane world. And and his conversations about spirit and nature, like what spirit is. I mean, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. So I really think he wrestled with placing the depth of his interior world into a psychology, a system of psychology that that took the psyche seriously and took spiritual experiences seriously, and could be talked about and looked at and wrestled with. And like you said, Shrikant, I mean, it's you don't see that very often. He's a powerful figure in that regard. So I think the cool part of having said all of that is it begs the question to us, because not only did he try to make all of that fit into a psychological field, but he did it in a way that was kind of empirical by his own standards. It's about phenomenology. It's about experience. It's not just theory. So then the onus goes back on us, right? I can't answer the question for all of us, but I can say, I believe that the answer to your question is to say, what have I actually experienced? What have I actually experienced? Like, not in theoretical realm, not in totally dogmatic perspectives, not only in my intellect. What has my life presented to me in experience? And where have I had something that might be a hint of the spiritual or the numinous or the transcendent or the eternal? And how do I make sense of it? How do I integrate it and build a relationship to it? So it's a big question. I think that I like to think of these questions as living riddles instead of having an answer. We each get to be a living riddle of that question because our life is the answer to it. There's no language that answers it.
Beautiful. That was great. That was just wonderful answer. Like so many different ways of saying the same thing. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. All right, folks. So I'm just delighted that, Aiden, I think we've got a great group of people here. I love the questions and comments and everything. And I really look forward to doing, continuing the series. So I would like everybody to, if you would like to share very briefly in a minute or less, what did you think of the meetup? What do you think of, because we are launching this series. I like this format very much, of having somebody who is really deep into Jung talk about their own experience of what they have learned from Jung. So any thoughts? What did you think of this one? Just go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to comment. Evanique, how was it?
I thought it was great. Thank you, Aiden, for coming. I think the takeaway that I got is about dreams, which I didn't expect coming in. But I think, with people's questions and also Aiden's answers, I just thought that was the highlight. And it makes me want to explore more of that topic. And I know Jung talks about it a lot in his writings. Well, from what I've listened to online, and it's not much compared to what he's done. But I think that's kind of the core, and I didn't get that until tonight, until you and Ada were talking. So I thought it was great. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else wants to comment? Otherwise, I'm going to have Aiden comment about how the meetup was, and let's go with Lisa. Lisa, what do you think of the meetup?
Hi. I really enjoyed the lively conversation and your enthusiasm, especially. It was really energizing. And I like that I mean that you're even doing this. So to know that there are other people out there who have these deep interests is very helpful, because it can feel very isolating when, you know, even something as personal as dreams, right? I mean, I don't think you should share them with just anyone. So I found it very comforting, and I've got some good resources now to move forward. So I look forward to the next one. That was very good.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to let you know that we've been doing meetups since COVID started. We've done more than 1,500 meetups. We do meetups every day. On Monday, we do meetups on collaborative poetry. Tuesday, we do Tao Te Ching. On Wednesday, we do comprehensivist Wednesdays, trying to connect different fields together. On Thursdays, we do power of myth. On Fridays, we are doing Jung. On Saturdays, we are doing Asian philosophy. And on Sundays, we do great plays of all times. So please, on 52 Living Ideas, you know, we do this all the time. So you're welcome to participate in as many as you want. Next up is going to be Judy. Judy, what did you think?
Oops. Sorry. Sorry. Oh my God, I'm challenged. I'm sorry. I enjoyed it very much. So thank you both. Thank you, Aiden. I'm very interested in this topic. I'm looking forward to learning more with you and on my own with the resources you're providing. There's just a lot to mine. I can see that. And I am very curious to see, you know, where it will take me. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I've put the email address for Aiden in the chat if anybody wants to contact him directly. Aiden, what do you think? How was it?
I mean, I had a blast. So whatever that's worth. I loved it. I thought it was fun to feed off of each other and, you know, find those trees that we wanted to hone in on. And maybe the only thought I had is that I wonder if it would be beneficial to have focused, like the journey piece is really fascinating to me, but maybe it's like, I'm thinking out loud here, but in terms of like feedback, this is just like thinking out loud, like the journey and one of your biggest focuses, like, right? Because like for me, I could be my journey and then we talk about dreams, right? Because that's like, that's my heart, you know?
Yeah, let's do that. So for the future ones, what we'll do is that whenever anybody's talking, we'll say, okay, I'll give both those things. I'll focus on one is, you know, the biggest thing for you from Jung, and any kind of like major steps, you know, major transformations.
I like that.
And what will happen is that then we can just zero in on maybe like 3 points or 5 points or even 1 point. It doesn't matter. And then we can have a conversation which is far deeper. But you know, so this is beautiful. Thank you. And Aiden, wonderful to see you.
And you as well, yeah.
Look forward to having you back again and again. All right.
Yes, to be continued, I'm sure. And thanks to everyone for participating and coming. This was awesome.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Good night.